After that, Rico, Talion, and Salus set off, heading for the old battlefield that had created a clearing in the woods. Since that part of the forest was already heavily damaged, it should make the perfect place to train, Silas thought, beginning to lead Talius and Rico that direction. As they walked, Talion kept having to stare over at Rico, whose new appearance and clothing were starting to draw his attention more, finding himself looking away, somewhat embarrassed when Rico would begin looking in his direction. Okay, I have to change my line of thought. Think about something. Something else, Talion thought to himself. Hey, teacher, since we're on our way to train anyways, why don't you tell me a bit about magic right now? I mean, how does it work? Why couldn't I use magic before, the same way that my mom uses it? As I explained, demonic magic is different than human magic. Primarily, it's because our energies are different. If you want an explanation as to why, well, basically, it's because demonic energy is, well, tainted. Well, what do you mean tainted? Listen, human beings produce all of the multitudes of different types of energies that all living beings produce. Demons, of course, produce them as well. But here's the kicker, the part that messes everything up when it comes to doing magic in the same way. Demons also produce demonic energy. The demonic energy sifts itself in, like mixing oil and water. Or perhaps I should claim some sort of dye. Yes, a dye would be more accurate. It does mix in, after all, while oil doesn't. I think you lost track of what we were talking about. Perhaps you could explain the reference? Talion asked. Oh, yeah, Silas said as they continued walking through the woods. Look, it's like this. The demonic energy that you produce mixes itself in with all of the other naturally occurring energies that you produce. Unlike humans, they don't have that extra layer of energy that filters its way in, mixing together with all of the other energies and clinging to them. Human beings have to send magical energy through a refining process in order to make it obtain the state that they need in order to use the magic spell that they want. But demonic energy can't pass through those same type of channels. The different magical mechanisms that are used to filter and process the raw magical energy into an energy that can be used don't work with demonic energy. And since your demonic energy clings to all the rest of your energy, refusing to allow it to pass unless the demonic energy can pass as well, effectively this stops you from being able to cast magic the way that human beings do. But that isn't exactly a disadvantage. You see, while human beings have to send their magical essence and energy through this refining process to make it useful, the reason that demons are able to utilize demonic abilities is because the demonic energy that we produce naturally has an obedience to our will that human energies simply don't have, forcing the other type of energies in our body to flow and function as we wish, at least in specific ways. This is how our natural demonic abilities work, like your fire breath, for example. Ooh, Master can breathe fire? Oh, so that's what all of those flaming things were for. Rico thinks she understands now. Yes, Rico, Salus replied. So, in order for demons to use magic, we have to go through a different process. Normally, our demonic energy functions to flow into our natural demonic abilities, like your fire breath, your enhanced physical strength, those types of things. they naturally force our extra energies to flow in that direction and fulfill that purpose as a natural thing, without us having to focus or intend for anything to happen. And unlike a human being who needs extensive training in magic in order to call forth large amounts of magical energy, demonic energy is much more easy to manipulate, but it's in sort of, well, what you might call a concentrated state. So, rather than having to send our energy through a refining process, demon magic relies on different elements. Rather than trying to refine the energy, demonic energy works by itself as a refined energy, and is exceptionally malleable. So instead of refining it, we simply give it direction. Demonic magic works by sending your demonic energy through channels, what you might think of as steps. Each step sort of molds the energy, giving it direction as to what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, so what are the steps? Taleon asked, smiling as he was beginning to enjoy this conversation topic, and was very excited about learning how to perform magic. Well, the refining process, the process by which you channel your demonic energy into magic, comes in a few basic steps, always in the exact same order. However, during these steps, you're also implying your intentions. Basically, you have to use your will to mold your demonic energy, force it to behave the way you want it to. This comes through concentration and training, and eventually results in magic. Now, this is fairly complicated, so try to pay attention. I don't want to have to keep explaining it, so commit it to memory, both of you, Silas said, looking back at Rico and Taleon as they followed him through the woods. Rico does not like you, but because Master wishes to learn magic, and Rico wishes to be useful to Master, she will listen. Yeah, Taleon replied. Thanks, Rico. And no problem, I'll pay attention, trust me. Good, Silas replied, turning his head back forward and continuing to walk. Now, the first stage in the process is called intent. This is where you concentrate the amount of demonic energy that you're using in the spell into a single point and then imbue that energy with your intent. This level is a very base intent, so you don't have to be very specific. What's most important is imbuing the energy with a strong sense of that specific intent. For example, destruction magic versus restoration magic. If you were using a destruction magic spell, at this first point, you would focus on the intent to bring harm to someone, while if it were in restoration, you focus on the intent to help someone. A desire to be nurturing, supportive, or a general sense of compassion. These things form positive energy and help mold your demonic energy to fulfill a positive or negative function, depending on the spell that you're trying to cast. The next step in the stage is known as store. This is an important part of the spell, as not all spells use the same amount of magic, and different casters have different levels of demonic energy, and are able to gather them in different proportions. Some people just have more energy, and others can gather it faster, and while others gather it slower. This can create a wide variance in how effectively one can gather spells, which is why the second step exists, store. Basically, after you begin gathering the energy and imbuing it with your intentions, whether positive or negative, store is, well, just what it sounds like. It's a storage space. Basically, you choose a point on your body, or even outside of your body, and you create a space within that location. in which you begin to stack that energy, storing it, until you've reached the sufficient supply necessary to perform the spell. And that's all there is to the second step. Now, on to the third step. This step is known as form. Now, form actually happens to fit the individual, and tends to be based off of you as a person. Basically, this is the part of the spell process in which you imbue the magic with a sense of form or status as to what it's going to physically be. For example, if you were using destruction magic, you need the magical essence that you've gathered up and stored to take a form, something that you hope will damage your enemy. For example, someone could visualize fire or electricity, and once the demonic energy passes through the storage section and is released into the form section, it begins to take the form that you intended within that section. If you visualize lightning, it becomes lightning. Visualize fire and it becomes fire. But these are only very basic things. They happen to be the fastest to visualize and manifest, because they don't require much thought. People instinctually know what lightning and fire look like, and to be afraid of them. So not much is required in order to force them into that state, to make them take the form you want them to. However, it can get a great deal more complicated. For example, restoration magic focuses on healing people, correct? So it only stands to reason that in the form part of casting the spell, you have to generate a form that will restore something. Once again, you can use something simple. You can visualize light, or steam, or even water if you want. Just something basic. And as the energy passes from the storage state into the form state and becomes light or water, it is imbued with the form of that state. But once again, you can get more complicated. The more complicated the form that you give something, the more stable the spell itself can become, but also the higher the demand for magic. In other words, the more complicated the form, the more demonic energy it's going to use up when you use the spell. So, if you're trying to destroy someone, use destruction magic. But instead of a fireball, or a breath of fire, or something like that, you try to visualize something more complex. For example, creating some type of fiery monster, giving that energy a form. This can make the spell much more powerful, but also much more costly. And then there's the last factor, the final segment that the energy must pass through before it is officially a spell. This is known as the release. Basically, the release comes in a few categories. Unlike all of the other ones, which are simply a single status, the release can fall into multiple statuses. For example, there's flow release versus burst release. Flow release is a type of release in which the magical energy comes out in a steady flow. Think of it like a running river. The water doesn't really stop running. It simply continues to pass, going from one destination to the next ceaselessly, always in a constant flow. While burst release is just that. Rather than releasing the energy in a stable flow of a specific amount, burst release simply gathers all of the energy that you imbued with all of your intentions, form, and releases it all at once, in a single burst. You may not think that these small differences matter, but I assure you that they do. All of these separate elements together form a magic spell. The ones that I've depicted to you here are only very basic spells that you could grasp if you truly understand the concept of demonic magic itself. However, once again, magic is only limited by your imagination. This is one of the things that's beneficial when it comes to demonic magic versus human beings' magic. You see, human beings have to learn all these countless intricate little things. They basically have to learn to be a designer just to be able to cast a magical spell, to build a magical machine of sorts, all in their head. It's very complex, and a massive pain in the butt. I've tried looking over some of their magical books, and trust me, it's a pain. Demonic casting is way easier. All you have to do is remember the basic steps that I've just told you. Follow them through from beginning to end, and you can create a magical spell. And unlike with human magic, it's much easier to get creative. Because the steps are simpler, it's far easier for someone to learn and develop their own style of magic. But wait a second, I thought you said that everyone who performs demonic magic falls into a specific skill set, a category. Exactly right. I'm glad to hear that you were paying attention, Silas replied the taleon. You are correct. Every demon falls into a specific school, a category, which is why it's more taxing for you to perform magic that's outside of that category. So basically, in order to effectively use magic, you have to understand the category of magic that you're creating while you're creating it. Every step in the process is like a tool with infinite possibilities to it. You can have countless intentions, give something any countless number of forms, store any level of power that you desire, and release it in any number of ways. All of these different aspects have hundreds of different possibilities for the way that you could do it. And each change that you make plays into what type of magic that you're creating. So long as you follow the steps in an appropriate fashion, you will create a magic that is within your category. Most demonic mages tend to create a book or some type of record of the types of spells that they have, ones that they like. They can even obtain knowledge of them from other demons, so you can begin to gain a collection and make yourself more formidable as a caster. This is why having a great amount of resources can really help, because the subtle changes that you can make to all of these categories can have drastic differences and major effects on what you produce. Things that are basically impossible to know unless you already know it. It's very hard to figure them out just through experimentation. It's of course plausible, it can be done, but doing so is an exceptionally time-consuming task of constant experimentation, seeing what happens if you change this small thing, or rearrange it in a certain way. Some demonic casters have even changed the order. For example, I knew an individual who would actually move store to after release. What? Taleon replied. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but it works. By changing the order of the pattern, he massively changed the effect of the magic he produces. In other words, he goes through all of the other steps, but instead of store coming second in line, he pushes it all the way to the end, and the magic isn't stored until after it's been given force, power, and been released from his body, and then is stored outside of his body. He uses it to create manipulable balls of energy that are dense and compact, and that he can control with his will. They're essentially still in a storage state, so he can move them around however he wants. Basically, he creates these balls of energy and then pummels you to death with them. It's far more effective than it sounds. There are countless different changes you can make to the magic you can produce. This is why demon casters are well respected and not to be trifled with.